What I was saying about tightening the lock nuts against each other. So let's just pretend that that's too loose and we want to tighten them down just a little bit. We're going to go lock nut and lock nut. And we're going to tighten them, right? And that will move that system in towards this system without loosening the individual systems from each other. And that way, you don't have to worry about getting the lock nut tight against the cone. It's already tight. Now we're just getting the two systems tight against each other. If you get them too tight, and they're just ever so slightly too tight, you generally don't want to use cone wrenches. One thing you can do is you can get the cone wrenches and go on the cones and loosen the cones against each other. You have to make sure that when you tighten the things, you're on lock nuts and lock nuts, not cone and lock nut. That'll mess it up. You have to make sure you're on lock nut and lock nut. If you want to loosen them against each other, you're going to go cone and cone. And if you go cone and cone and you loosen the cones away from each other, that will loosen the two individual systems away from each other without loosening the individual systems. Generally, you want to avoid doing that because obviously a cone wrench is not very strong because it's really thin. You can damage them sometimes. If you're doing little tiny adjustments, it might be okay. But if you really need to make a big adjustment to the cones, then probably just go ahead and take them apart again and redo it. Now this cone system is acceptable. Probably it could use some grease. I think that's really the only issue going on with it, and you can feel it when you turn it. You can feel it like rub. Feel that? I don't think it's too tight. I think it just needs grease. But we're not going to worry about that, mostly because I couldn't get the quick release to come completely out, and so I can't do it. You have to take the quick releases off to be able to get to the cup and cone systems. Okay, so hubs, completely. Not quite. One last thing. Installing a cassette. So you can see we've got these grooves. One of them is going to be bigger than the other. This one is longer than the rest. When you look down here, you'll see that one of them is going to be longer than the rest. And it's pretty easy. You just line it up and then put it on. This is a really easy cassette because it's pretty much all one piece. You're going to take the next one, the next cog. This is kind of, no, this is all right. If you look at this cassette, you'll notice that some of the teeth are shaped differently than others, and that there's these little like shapes on the cogs themselves. And what that is for is to assist the chain in shifting, so you get smoother shifting. It's called ramped cassettes, ramped cogs. You mostly see that on chain rings in the front because those are large movements for the chain. So having ramped in chain rings really helps it shift a lot smoother. You don't need it. Okay, so we're going to take this cog. These cogs, by the way, are measured by the number of teeth that are on there. So this would be 8, 10, 12. This is a 12 tooth. Yeah, this is a 12 tooth cog. And they're just measured by that. And it usually says somewhere on it, this is it right here, so this is a 14 tooth cog, or just say 14T. You line that up. Okay, then we're going to take the lock ring. Now the lock ring doesn't have to be tight. It doesn't have to be really tight, because the shape and the grooves on the freewheel and the inside of the cassette is what's going to keep it from turning when you turn the crank. All this does is keeps it from falling off the end. Okay, so as long as it doesn't fall off the end, it's going to work just fine. So you don't have to crank the crap down out of this thing. You want it to be tight, but you don't need to like kill it. It didn't hurt your mom. It's just on there to hold it together. For that, you need a cassette tool, which is this guy right here. It just goes down in there. And screw it in. And you give it just do a little turn. And that's good. To remove this thing, again, cassette tool. It's standard threaded, so turn it left. Oh, but look what we got going on there. It's turning. With a cassette, you need the chain whip. And the chain whip goes on just like that and keeps it from turning. Simple as that. With a freewheel, you don't need a chain whip because when you try to unscrew it, what you're unscrewing is actually the freewheel itself. So this is the freewheel itself. So when you unscrew the freewheel, it's not going to turn because it's the freewheel, not the cassette around the freewheel. And for that, you need a freewheel tool, which is usually longer, slightly different in shape. So there we have that. That's all together. Okay. Generally on the axle, you're going to have a washer between the axle bolt. This one has two because the axle is kind of long. There's different lengths of axles, and that depends on how many cogs you need, how much space you need. You can get track wheels or track frames that are meant only to accommodate one cog, and so they're really close together. On a bike like this, the drop valves are kind of far apart because it's meant to accommodate multiple gears. The track frame would be more like in here. And as such, you want a shorter axle so you're not like screwing things in forever. That's the purpose of different like axles. Okay, hubs, done. Spokes. Alright, so now we're going to talk about truing the wheel. I'm going to go over here to our truing stand. And there's all kinds of little knobs and things that you can turn to do this. And you don't need to crank it down against the inside. You just crank, you don't need to bolt the wheel into the truing stand. You just turn this to tighten it. And then you see we've got this one, the calipers, and that's going to go in there. And we've got this adjustment that's going to go up and down. I haven't checked this. Hopefully it's a little out of true. Okay, this is actually pretty acceptable for the bikes we use at Wildcat Wheels, but I'll just go ahead and show you what happens when you do things to it. The reflector, it's a good idea to go ahead and push it up so it's out of the way. It's dead. Okay. Never mind. So, the idea is simple enough. You adjust the caliper so you can hear it and see it rubbing. So you can see it's rubbing on the left side. So what we're going to do, we're going to take your spoke wrench. There's multiple sizes. This is a number 2, pretty standard. 2 is pretty standard. This might be a 1. Yeah, okay, so this is a 1. You want to make sure you get the right size. It's pretty important. If it's one size too large, you're going to round out the spoke nipple head. You're going to have to replace the spoke nipple. Replacing spokes is really easy. If you ever break one, just so you know, you just work it out of the thing, get a new spoke that's the same length. You're going to put it back in. You're going to try and get it back in the exact same way as the one before it. And to do that, you can just look at it and see, right? So if this spoke broke, it's in this hole. So it's coming out from the center, right? And then crossing over and crossing under. Now if this one broke, we don't have that one to look at. So we know that it's in between 2 that are going in and then coming out. So we know that we'll just go to another one that's in between 2 that are going in and coming out. We'll look between them and we'll see this spoke. It's coming out from the center, crossing over, crossing under. You take it, you're going to feed it in there, cross it over, cross it under, bring it out to the spoke nipple, screw it back in, get it tightened correctly. If, say, this spoke broke, that is a right side spoke, it would break, then the rim is going to flex way over here, and you're going to see that. And then just as you tighten it, you'll see very clearly it's going to come back over. That's how you replace a spoke. Spoke nipples, exactly the same. You just unscrew the spoke nipple, pull it out, put it in the wheel. They're pretty cheap, unless you have Mavic wheels. I mean, they're not. Mavic is a company that likes to make really specialized spoke nipples and spokes. Kind of expensive. They're like $1 for each one of these things. It kind of sucks. So, okay, here we go. We've got it. It's rubbing on this side. So what are we going to do? We're going to first check to see the tension of the spokes, which they're pretty tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen a left side spoke, which you always want to, and I still have to think about this. It's kind of counterintuitive which way you need to turn the spoke wrench to loosen it or tighten it. It is standard threaded, and you just have to remember the spoke nipple is the nut. So to loosen it, we're going to go this way, which is going to feel like you're tightening it because with your hand you're turning it to the right. But in reality you're turning the nut around the bolt counterclockwise, even though your hand is turning clockwise relative to yourself, because it's connected. So you're thinking, looking at it this way, even if you're looking at it this way, your mind is going to think you're turning it clockwise, but you're not, because this, if you just totally disconnect from that, you're turning it this way, right? Just counterclockwise. So whenever you make an adjustment to a spoke nipple, always think about which way you need to turn it. So I did that. Move the rim to the right, and now we're not rubbing. You want to use small adjustments. You don't want to do large adjustments to low numbers of spoke nipples. You want to do small adjustments to a lot of nipples. So an example of that would be, we're rubbing on the left side again here. So I'm going to go like and this is what happens when spoke nipples are too tight. You start rounding out. So we're going to loosen that up like a quarter turn. Then we're going to come over here and we're going to loosen that up like a quarter turn, right? Then we're going to come over here, loosen that one up a quarter turn. And then move this one up a quarter turn, right? So we're not doing big adjustments to one thing. We're doing lots of little adjustments. And that's pretty true. Right there. That's pretty good. I'll go ahead and unscrew one really far so you can see what that will look like. Can you see that? That's a pretty acute problem right there. So in this situation, like, I know which one I unscrewed, so I'm going to do a large adjustment to one. That's only because I know which one